Before the war ended, before the world understood the scale of its own nightmare, survivors whispered a single name with fear: Amon Göth. To them, he was not just an SS commandant, he was the man whose presence meant death, whose authority stretched across ghettos, transports, and the vast expanse of the Płaszów camp. History would later expose the system that produced him, but those who lived under his rule already knew the truth. This was a man shaped by extremism, fueled by ideology, and empowered by a regime that rewarded cruelty. His story is not fiction. It is not an exaggeration. It is a real chapter of World War II, a chilling reminder of how far a single individual can go when hatred becomes policy and power becomes absolute. This is the journey of Amon Göth, a journey into one of the darkest corners of the Holocaust, and into the mind of the Commandant the world must never forget. Amon Göth's rise within the Nazi system was not sudden, nor was it accidental. It was the product of a lifetime shaped by extremism, ambition, and the authoritarian world he willingly embraced. By the early 1940s, Europe had been engulfed by World War II, and the Nazi state had expanded its power through both conquest and terror. In this expanding machinery, personalities like Goeth were not only welcomed, they were elevated. After years in underground political activism, smuggling weapons across borders, and building connections within the SS, Goeth emerged as a seasoned operative in the Nazi racial program. His administrative work with the Reich Commissioner for the Consolidation of German Nationhood gave him experience in displacement, population control, and the logistics of forced deportation. These were skills the regime desperately needed as its policies evolved from persecution into systematic annihilation. By 1942, Operation Reinhard was underway, a top-secret plan to eliminate the Jewish population of occupied Poland. 3 extermination camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, had already begun their operations under Odilo Globocnik. Goeth, transferred to Lublin that summer, joined the staff of the very man coordinating these camps. Though the details of his work remain hidden behind wartime secrecy, his later trial confirmed he participated in selecting, organizing, and transporting victims to their deaths. Goeth's behavior during these months impressed his superiors. His ideological dedication was unquestioned, his willingness to follow orders absolute. He was efficient, loyal, and unburdened by conscience. For Nazi bureaucrats, he embodied the ideal officer: cold, meticulous, and obedient. So when, in early 1943, the SS sought a new figure capable of transforming a labor camp near Kraków into a central hub of forced labor and transit, Goeth's name rose to the top of the list. The site was Płaszów. Goeth arrived on 11th February 1943 as the new commandant, riding into the camp with full authority and direct backing from the highest levels of the SS hierarchy. The camp itself stood on desecrated ground, 2 Jewish cemeteries bulldozed and leveled to make room for prisoner barracks. It was a symbolic act, reflecting the ideological contempt the regime held for those it imprisoned. Goeth wasted no time establishing his rule. Survivors who lived through Płaszów recalled that he did not behave like a bureaucrat, but like a man who believed himself untouchable. Some described him as theatrical, others as unpredictable, but all feared him. He patrolled the camp on horseback, asserting dominance through his sheer presence. His dogs, trained to attack on command, followed closely behind. The liquidation of the Kraków ghetto occurred 1 month into his command. Thousands were driven through the streets under armed guard, loaded onto trucks, or forced to march to Płaszów. Those deemed unable to work were sent to extermination centers. Hundreds were killed during the evacuation. Testimonies later recounted how Goeth issued orders with chilling detachment, treating human lives as logistical obstacles. But Goeth's influence did not stop at Kraków. The Nazis soon tasked him with the liquidation of other Jewish communities, including Tarnów, once home to 25,000 Jews. By 1943, only a fraction remained. Goeth supervised the final deportations, half to Płaszów, half to Auschwitz. Witnesses later testified that he personally killed dozens during this liquidation. His power grew alongside the camp. Płaszów expanded rapidly, swallowing surrounding land, adding new barracks, workshops, and administrative offices. The camp population grew from 2,000 prisoners to more than 25,000 by mid-1944. Over 150,000 people passed through the site, many staying only briefly before being sent elsewhere. The SS rewarded Goeth with promotions and praise. His commanding officers considered him loyal to Nazi racial policy, efficient in handling ghetto eliminations, and capable of organizing forced labor on a scale few could manage. In their eyes, he was a model commander. But among the prisoners, he inspired only one emotion: fear. And as the war intensified, that fear would become a defining element of life inside Płaszów, because Goeth's authority and his capacity for terror were about to reach their peak. To understand Płaszów under Amon Göth, one must understand the nature of absolute power. Unlike many camps that operated under rigid chains of command, Płaszów, especially in 1943, functioned according to one man's will. Goeth's authority was nearly unchecked, and he exercised it in ways that blended ideology with personal dominance. The camp grew at a staggering pace. Located on the outskirts of Kraków, its initial purpose as a labor camp quickly expanded into something far larger. Workshops, factories, storage depots, and administrative buildings spread across the site. Prisoners worked in construction, tailoring, metalwork, carpentry, and countless other labor units. Every day meant hard labor, long hours, and little food. Goeth controlled all of it. Survivor accounts describe him appearing suddenly on horseback or stepping onto his balcony overlooking the camp, surveying the prisoners below. The sight of his Tyrolean hat became a warning. Seasoned, prisoners knew that when he appeared, danger followed. People attempted to blend into crowds, avoid eye contact, or hide behind structures, desperate to avoid his attention. Accounts from his later trial reveal a man who thrived on unpredictability. He enforced collective punishment, a method rooted in Nazi ideology that held entire groups responsible for the actions of one. If a worker escaped, Goeth ordered executions. If food was found hidden, several suffered for one person's desperation. Prisoners remembered his decisions as sudden and arbitrary, like a storm that struck without warning. The camp's most feared location was Hujowa Górka, nicknamed Prick Hill by inmates, a site where murders were routinely carried out. From 1943 to 1944, thousands were taken there. Goeth oversaw the selection of many victims and was present during numerous killings, according to witnesses later brought to testify against him. Yet even amid terror, fragments of individual stories emerged. On his birthday in 1943, Goeth ordered a newly arrived prisoner, Natalia Karp, to play the piano in his villa. She played Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. Something in her performance moved him, and he spared both her and her sister. It was one of the few recorded moments where Goeth displayed hesitation, and one of the moments survivors remembered most vividly. To them, it showed that he retained the ability to make moral choices. He simply chose not to. As 1944 approached, the Nazi war effort began to falter, and scrutiny increased within the SS itself. Płaszów was reclassified as an official concentration camp under the SS Wirtschaftsverwaltungshauptamt, bringing it under stricter regulation. Ironically, conditions improved slightly, not because of compassion, but because the camp became subject to centralized standards. This shift exposed Goeth's mismanagement. SS auditors discovered irregularities, missing property, unreported valuables, and discrepancies in food allocations. According to Nazi law, Jewish belongings were state property, not for personal enrichment. Goeth's accumulation of wealth, from stolen clothing to household goods, drew attention he could no longer avoid. In September 1944, the SS charged him with corruption, theft, and improper camp management. His removal shocked the prisoners. Some felt relief, others confusion. To many, his arrest seemed surreal. The man who had wielded absolute control had suddenly been stripped of authority. He was sent to a mental institution. The war was collapsing. German territory was shrinking by the day. Płaszów was evacuated and later dismantled as Soviet forces advanced. But although Goeth escaped SS punishment, the world beyond the Reich had not forgotten him. The Allies had begun documenting the system of camps, gathering evidence from survivors, liberating ghettos, and uncovering the remnants of Nazi operations. Goeth's crimes had been witnessed by thousands, and the ones who survived would soon have their chance to speak. After the fall of Nazi Germany in May 1945, Europe was a landscape of ruins. Cities destroyed, governments collapsed, and millions displaced. Amid the chaos, Allied forces worked to identify former Nazis and bring them to justice. Amon Göth attempted to vanish into this sea of confusion. He donned a Wehrmacht uniform, hoping to pass as a low-level soldier. For a brief period, he succeeded. But one of the survivors from Płaszów, Józef Lewkowicz, recognized him. Lewkowicz informed American authorities, setting in motion the chain of events that would lead to Goeth's judgment. The Americans detained Goeth and eventually extradited him to Poland for trial. In Kraków, the very city whose ghetto he had liquidated, he faced the Supreme National Tribunal beginning on 27 August 1946. The courtroom was filled with survivors, journalists, lawyers, and representatives from newly liberated Poland. Goeth stood accused of crimes that had never before been formally prosecuted in human history: systematic persecution, forced deportation, unlawful imprisonment, and mass murder executed as state policy. He was also the first defendant in a war crimes tribunal to be convicted specifically for personal homicide, a legal milestone that underscored the individual responsibility behind collective atrocity. Witnesses came forward with testimonies that were calm, precise, and devastating. They described the camp in detail, the fear, the forced labor, the selections. They identified Goeth as the man whose orders determined life or death, whose presence froze thousands in terror, and whose authority shaped the daily reality of Płaszów. The tribunal reviewed official SS documents, command logs, transport records, and confiscated property inventories. They examined Goeth's administrative role in Tarnów, Szebny, and Kraków. They studied the camp's structure, the number of prisoners, and the transit lists connecting Płaszów to extermination camps across Poland. The evidence was overwhelming. Goeth's defense, that he was following orders, was rejected outright. International law was changing. The world had seen too much to allow obedience to excuse atrocity. Following orders, the judges ruled, does not absolve moral responsibility. On 5 September 1946, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts, he was sentenced to death. On 13 September 1946, 3 years to the day after he oversaw the liquidation of parts of Kraków, Amon Göth was executed by hanging at Montelupish prison. His remains were cremated and his ashes scattered in the Vistula River, not far from where his prisoners once laboured and suffered. But his story did not end there. In 1993, Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List introduced the world to the horrors of Płaszów and the truth about Goeth's command. Ralph Fiennes' portrayal, praised for its chilling accuracy, revived global awareness of the man survivors had feared so deeply. For many viewers, it was the first time learning the name Goeth, a name that had defined terror for thousands during the war. Yet the true legacy of Amon Göth lies not in film or fiction, but in the testimonies preserved by those who endured his rule. Their stories, written and spoken after liberation, form one of the most important archives of human memory. They reveal not only the brutality of one commandant, but the dangers of a system that allowed such individuals to rise to power. Amon Göth's life is a warning etched into history. When hatred becomes policy and ideology becomes law, the capacity for cruelty grows beyond measure. And when a government rewards violence, men like Goeth emerge, not by accident, but by design. The survivors of Płaszów carried his memory not to glorify him, but to ensure the world never forgets what happens when humanity is abandoned. And in that memory, justice, though delayed, is forever preserved.